what is process theology? Anyone just? Come on, seminarian.
Well, we're in a relationship with God. God learns from us, we learn from God. Theology is evolving. It's a process.
Lauren and I took a course on the theology of, who's the primary process theologian? John Cobb. Okay. And John Cobb was, what's his, I think his denominational background is important here. Do you know what his denominational background is?
You said he's Methodist.
Yeah, United Methodist. And that's actually quite important. Methodism as a theological orientation tends to be more inductive in method than the Reformed tradition. Methodism, you talk about, Methodism was actually, method was a derogatory term. It was like, oh, they have a method to get excited. They have a method. And their method has to do with experience and experiencing God. So it's more an inductive process as opposed to the Reformed theological tradition, which is creedal and more deductive in method. So you have these creeds and you deduce the experience, the theology from there. This is more from here. And I think that actually makes quite a bit of difference as far as understanding John Cobb. So, okay, so John Cobb, we're talking about experience. Let us now turn to the attributes of God. Remember we talked about the classical attributes of God? This is when Christianity in its early days went into the old Greco-Roman world and just took off, remember? Just took off. Remember Paul? Paul was a Roman citizen. Very important. Rome was the occupying, and as Christianity expanded into the basin of the Mediterranean, it just took off. And the classical traditions of Plato and Aristotle is very important understanding. Was it Whitehead who said all of Western theology is a footnote to Plato? I think that's a bit overstatement, but there's some truth in this. And the classical attributes of God are what? That God is
Immutable.
Immutable. Immutable meaning unchangeable. Doesn't change. God does not change. God is constant. What's another characteristic of God?
All-powerful.
Omnipotent. Immutable, all-powerful, all-knowing, eternal, because God created time. God is outside of time. So, eternal. So, beginning and end does not apply to God. After and before does not apply to God because God is eternal. God created time, therefore God is outside of time. Anyone else? Any other? I think there may be some others, but you get the gist of what that is. Now, process theology comes in with a slightly different angle. And what are the attributes that, omnipresent. God is always present. Can be always present. Process theology comes in with a slightly different angle. And the attribute that, the first one that is challenged is the idea of omnipotent. Omnipotent, that God is not all-powerful. Is that right? The second one is God all-knowing? No. No. What about immutable?
Definitely.
Definitely not. What about eternal? Before and after? Is there a before and after of God?
Yeah, God continues.
There is a before and after. So God, that God is not eternal in the same way that you'd say that God created. God is in time. That would be slightly different. I actually think Cobb, to think about him is important, is that I actually think he's in his life, is quite pietistic. I mean, he's a regular churchgoer, and I think that the idea that the personal faith, I suspect he just presumes it. He just assumes it. You know, that this is something that this is this experience of faith, of the incarnation, of taking the sacraments, the whole the whole caboodle is already there. He doesn't explain it much. You know, he doesn't talk much about it. And so I get this impression, like David said, that it's like, save the world, okay, but, and as the comment, the guy in the comment says, but what about the personal? What about that? Now, remember, Cobb defines Christ as God's action in the world. Now, you can debate that definition. But if you accept that definition of Christ, then nobody's going to have any trouble saying Jesus Christ within the United Church of Christ. What are your thoughts about some of the ideas that we have about the attributes of God, about Cobb's definition, about places where you see, you know, if you were to follow this theological orientation, what would you be asked to be giving up? You know, as far as your understanding of the religious life or of God?